How are you? I hope everyone is gesund, stark, und freilich, begashmis und beruchnis. I hope everyone is healthy, strong, and happy physically and spiritually. Today is Yutas Elul Erev Shabbos Kodesh, Pashas Ki Savo, and we'll speak in Mirz Hashem a thought for the week. But first, as usual, we'll say a pasuk, a tefillah to the Eibishter. We'll pick a pasuk from Kapitel Chav Zayin that we're saying twice a day these days. So Kapitel Chav Zayin, pasuk Ches. Lecha omar libi, bakshu fonoi, es panecha adinoi avakesh. The pasuk says, on your behalf my heart says, seek my countenance from me. Seek my countenance, your countenance. Hashem I seek. And that's what you say. So we see in this pasuk that a word that we're using is avakish, to seek. Interestingly enough, we spoke before about the pasuk also in this kapitel, which says, Acha shalti meis Hashem oiso avakish. So over there also it says, this is what I seek. So the commentators on the other pasuk, Acha shalti meis Hashem oiso avakish, explain that sometimes we can say talk is cheap. Yeah, this is what I want. But what are you doing about it? When you say, Acha shalti meis Hashem, that's the only thing you ask for. Fine. That's what you're saying. But prove it. How do you know that's what you're holding? If we add, Oisa Vakesh, this is what I seek. And seeking doesn't only mean wishful thinking. Seeking means you're busy. You show how you're seeking it. You express how you're seeking it. It makes an afkimin al Allah. It makes an actual difference in your life, as we will see. But first, we'll talk about a thought for the week. The pasuk says, "V'hoya kisovei el haaretz," when you enter the land, and the pasuk in our parsha begins with the mitzvah of bikurim, offering the first fruits to Hashem. Rashi says, we see over here when it says to enter the land, it doesn't mean as soon as you enter, but what does it really mean to enter? Magid. First, we had to conquer the entire land and divide it amongst all the tribes, which took 14 years, and then the obligation of the first fruits began. So what we're going to talk about today is not the real pshat. We have to sometimes make a difference between what's the true pshat and what's like a pshat b'derech drush. Just like in everything, there's levels. There's things when we speak about at the ultimate level, at the absolute level, and then when we speak about it in a lower level. Today, we're going to talk about it on a lower level, especially as it relates to Melech Basada, the avodah that's demanded of us during the month of Elul. So the Rebbe speaks in another sikha, famous sikha, and we spoke about this last year, that kisavoy, to enter, means to enter completely. A bir gemura. But today we're actually going to bring out a slightly opposite point. That there's something which is kisavoy. As soon as you arrive, as soon as you enter, as soon as you take the first step, and then wonderful things will follow. Why am I taking the liberty to say such a pshat? So I'll tell you a story. There was one year where I was in 770 for Shabbos Shuvah, and I felt very dry, very uninspired. So I sat down on 770 in the Shabbos morning, and it was Shabbos Shuvah, and I decided, Eibishter, please, let me feel something. So I opened up a Tanya, and I started reading Igeres HaTshuvah. And I was reading it like I was saying Tillim, not really learning it in depth, just reading the words, L'shoinei Azov of the Alter Rebbe, the holy words of the Alter Rebbe and Tanya. I figured just reading Igeres HaTshuvah on Shabbos Shuvah will make me feel something. Anyways, I'm reading. It took a while because I read until I reached chapter 11, which is almost the entire Igeres HaTshuvah. And then I came to these words where it says, K'maimer Azal. I once spoke about this before. As our Sayyidus say, Habo l'tayr Messiah say. And the Alter Rebbe says, Habo daike miyad shebo. Alter Rebbe says, our Sayyidus say, whoever comes to purify himself is given assistance. And it says, Habo. All you have to do is be Habo l'tayr. And what does it mean, Habo? As soon as he comes. just by haba, just by doing the act of arriving, showing up, coming. Miyad sheba. He's helped. So I came to these words and I was stopped in my tracks. And I just stood there for a long, long time trying to allow these words to wash over me, to soak in them, to feel something. Wow! Look at what the Alter Rebbe says over here. He takes this Maimer Azal, Habo L'Tayr, and he says, Habo Daike, Miyad Shabo. Now obviously, it doesn't mean something external. It doesn't mean you're playing games. It means something serious, and it means something honest. And we once spoke about this before, and we have to further investigate the story, where it speaks about the Bnei Korach, that even though Rashi brings down in Parshas Pinchas, Uvnei Korach lo mesu, that even though they went down into the abyss, but nevertheless, Uvnei Korach lo mesu, because somehow they had a sense of regret, and that regret caused Hashem to take a pause, that they shouldn't get punished, and then they had time to do the real tshuva. So whilst they were in Gehenim, so to speak, they did tshuva. But from here we see a fantastic idea and an awesome truth, that even Bnei Korach, that were at the center, at the heart of the whole machlokes, which was a great sin, they were part of this argument against Moshe Rabbeinu. But nevertheless, since it was here tshuva, they had a real sense of regret, everything stops. And we give them another chance, etc. So here we have a Meiser Rav from Torah Shebechsav with the story of Bnei Korach, which is a very, very important example. So over here too, we say, Habo L'Tayr. Messiah say, Habo Daike Miyad Shabo. It must mean a certain shift. It must mean that you're honest. You're saying Hineni. But the question is, to what degree is this Hineni? Does it mean that I'm holding already by turning around my life totally or not? Maybe it means, even if it's a small amount of change, but it's still real. I want to become better. I want to change. And that's what l'chera means. Habo daike miyad shebo. As soon as the person shows that he's interested, that will make a difference. A higher degree, of course, is what the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, chapter 42, which, by the way, that chapter is an amazing chapter. And one day we'll have to address some of the issues in that chapter more in depth. But over there, the Alter Rebbe talks about revealing yirat Tata, a lower level of fear, and he says, and he compares it to the posik, Im tevaksheno chakosef v'chamatmoinim tachpeseno. He says, if you seek it like money, it says tevaksheno chakosef. Again, avakesh, bakesh, tevaksheno, and tachpeseno. And then he says, Pirush kederech shemechapes odem mitmoin vo'itzer atomen besachtis ha'oretz shechoifer achrav b'yigia atzuma. So over here the Alter Rebbe really describes it as a great effort, in the manner of a person seeking a hidden treasure buried in the depth of the earth, for which he digs with tireless toil, for he knows that it is surely buried there. And over here he speaks about kein tzorech lachbei b'yigia atzuma. So we're talking about awesome toil. Legalis oitzes shegiras shamayim hatzofel umuster in the heart of every yid. So there's degrees and there's levels. I assume when the Alter Rebbe says Habo L'Tayr, it doesn't mean that the person is about to make a complete about face, turnaround from 0 to 1,000 in 1 second. It means something less than the Yigia Atzuma he's talking about over here. And that's why he makes the diuk. Habo daike miyad sheba. It doesn't talk about all of a sudden the Yigia Atzuma, just miyad sheba. And this is how it's explained in the Rebbe's Maimorim about the Melech Pasoda, And the Melech goes out into the Sodeh, and he's greeting every single one of us. Beponim seichakos. The king is greeting us with a smiley face, warmly, and without any preparations, without any red tape. We can go immediately to the king himself, and we find the king smiling at us. And the Rebbe explains in a couple of Maimarim that it does mean that the person arouses from himself a feeling of Kabbalah Seil. You're interested enough that you accept the authority of the king, to the degree that if you hear that the king is in the field, you go out to greet him. That's what you got to do. You have to go out to greet the king. But even the Rebbe says, if at that point in your life, you're still a ish sada, you're still a farmer, you're still a peasant, you're still necessarily, probably, maybe on a low level spiritually, and you don't have a full, activated Kabbalah Seil, you're not citizen number one of your country, you're not receiving any medals of honor, you actually have a lot of fines you have to pay to the motor vehicle department, or who knows what. But nevertheless, you have this amount of Kabbalah Seil that you recognize the authority of the king, and you respect the king, and you hear that the king is in the field, so you go out to greet him. And then the Rebbe says, that itself, that you show up, Haba, you came to greet the king. Then you realize the faith that the king has in you, and how much he loves you, so you don't want to let down the king. And the king's faith in you inspires you to improve and become better greatly. And this is what means, just show up, just arrive, go out into the field. You have to make a shtickle shift. You do have to get out of bed. You do have to wake up. Just wake up, greet the king who's waiting to smile at you and help you, Messiah, they say, in whatever way you want to become better. I heard two anecdotes recently. One is a story, and one is a famous joke. But they bring out this point, and I think it's very, very important. First, we'll say the story. They say the story about a certain gadol. His name was Reb Isaac Chorev. He was a big Talmud Chacham. He was a big guy in Talmud, and he was looking for a shidduch, for a groom for his only daughter. So he showed up to the famous yeshiva Chachmei Lublin, and he said he's ready to support his future son-in-law for as long as they want to learn. And not only that, he promises that whoever becomes his son-in-law will one day inherit his position as the chief rabbi of a certain town or a city. But there's one challenge. I'm going to pose a very difficult question that I have for many years, a question in Talmud. And whoever knows the answer or can figure out the answer will become my future son-in-law. So he posed the question to the whole Zal, to the whole Besmedrish, to the whole study hall. And all of a sudden there was a big excitement that they were all arguing back and forth to try to come up with the answer. And one after the other, he knocked down their answers. No good, no good, no good. Okay, he put on his coat, he walked out of the Besmedrish, he's walking towards the train station, he's going to go to another town, to another city, and do the same thing. Go into the Zal, say, I'm looking for the Bach who knows how to learn the best, and who wants to learn and dedicate himself to learning, and his life is about learning, and he'll do the same thing. Meanwhile, as he's walking along towards the train station, he hears the sound of running footsteps behind him. And he turns around, and someone's shouting, wait, wait, wait. He turns around, and he sees a young bacher, a student from the Besmedrish. And the bacher, the student, says, Shidduch hayin, shidduch haher. But what's the answer to the question? He says, forget about the shidduch. Okay, I lost the competition, so to speak. But what's the answer to the question? So the Baisel said, aha! I found the one I'm looking for. In other words, the one person who really wanted to understand. In other words, the one person who the study of Torah was the end in itself. Whether he's going to get the reward or whether he wins the prize or not. He wants to understand. Mazel tov, you're my future son-in-law. So in other words, the point of the story is similar to the idea that you have to be interested. You have to care. Spirituality has to matter to you. The other one is an old Jewish joke that Zalman Jaffe, Reb Zalman Jaffe was a chassid, a famous chassid from Manchester, and he told the Rebbe this joke. But until I looked up the story myself, I never saw one sentence that's added to this joke, which I think is so revealing, what the Rebbe's comment was. And Reb Zalman Jaffe was talking to the Rebbe about people who not necessarily always listen to what the Rebbe tells them to do. So Reb Zalman Jaffe said, it's reminiscent of the famous old Jewish joke about the Shtotz Ganav. You have a Ganav in every city, there was a Ganav. He also has to earn a living. So there was a Jewish Ganav, there were sweet fellows, and they would sacrifice themselves to help another Jew, trust me, but they also had to earn a livelihood and they didn't have anything else. So one night, in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock in the morning, 2:30, he goes into a home and he doesn't realize it's the Rov's home. So he did his usual modus operandi. He would go through the chimney. So he went through the chimney of the Rov's home, and he lands at the bottom in the fireplace, which is not on, obviously, or else he wouldn't have gone there. And as he lands at the bottom of the chimney, he gives a look. There's the Rav in the dining room learning Torah. Because the Rav learns day, the Rav learns day and night, 2 o'clock in the morning, and the Rav lands. The Rav is learning. So the Rav looks at him and says, Yankel, what are you doing here? He would never suspect that he's a Ganav. So he instantly asked him, Yankel, what are you doing here, Yankel? So Yankel says, Rav, I need to ask you a shaila. I have to ask you a shaila. People come to the Rav and always ask shailas. Rav, I have to ask you a shaila. So the Rav says, no. And then Yankel says, V'azoi kriegt mir arois von danet. He says, Rav, how do I crawl out of here? I'm in such a mess. So Zalman Jaffe was bringing out that sometimes people get themselves into situations, into messy situations, and because they didn't listen to the Rebbe, and then they asked the Rebbe for help, how to get out of the situation. So the lesson of the joke is very, very profound. As long as you're aware that you're in a mess, as long as you're aware that you have to ask the shaila, wie azoi kriegt mir arois von danet. It's the end of the year, and you're making a cheshbon nefesh, and you see how many areas you could still improve, and it seems like there's a huge amount of work you have to do, and you have that question, wie azoi kriegt mir arois von danet. How am I going to crawl out of it? And the answer is, as long as you have the question, you will get out of it. Habol atayim sayna, you say. Just ask yourself that question. Have that awareness. If you have that awareness, that's the first step of being able to get out. When Reb Zalman Jaffe said this story to the Rebbe commented, too many have the teretz before the shaila. That was the Rebbe's comment on this anecdote. So that's a very deep statement. Too many have the teretz before the shaila, which means, like they say, it's a chalein meichel given, Some people, they just say, I'm good. The way I am, I don't have to change, I don't have to improve. How am I going to improve? Whatever. They found their own solutions. They forgave themselves, etc., etc. That's what it means that too many have the teretz before the shaila. You have to have the shaila. How am I really going to become better? How am I really going to improve? How could I really maximize my potential? And you have to go to a Rav. You have to go to a mashpia. You have to go to someone who knows a bit more than you. Asay l'charav. Go to your Asay l'charav and ask him the shaila, vi azoi kriegt men arois von danet. And that's, maybe we could say, one of the Rosh Tevis of Tov Shin Pei Beis, Could be Tehei Shnas Ponai Bakshu. Tehei Shnas Pei Beis. We have to go for Ponai, which means we're going for the deep stuff. We're going to really, hopefully, come to great advancement. But it has to be Ponai Bakshu. Bakshu doesn't only mean words. Bakshu means you're actually doing something. Whether it's a shift that you got out of bed, which for some people just getting out of bed could be the hardest thing, or whether it's somebody digging for treasure, like the Alter Rebbe says, B'yigia Atzuma. So there's levels, but we got to start at the first level. The first level is that you went out to greet the king. We're not even talking about how you're going to change your lifestyle, but the mere fact itself that you're going out to greet the king. The Eibusher Helfen, that we should all go out to greet the king, and the king with the Madaponim Seicha case is going to bring us, the Melech HaOlam is going to bring us the revelation of Melech HaMashiach, Begula Mitzvah Shlema, take it from Yad Mamish. Good Shabbos. Oh, I just want to say that yesterday was Chai Elul, the Yom Haledes of the Baal Shem Tov, and the Yom Haledes of the Alter Rebbe. So that's also one of the main points of Chassidus. The Alter Rebbe writes in his Tanya, Ki korei ve'lecha adav me'id. He's talking about Torah mitzvahs, and he says, it's close to you. In other words, you could say that Chassidus, the Baal Shem Tov, the Alter Rebbe, they came to make it easier. What does it mean they came to make it easier? They came to make it more accessible. They came to make it easier that you could reach further. That's what it means. Habal l'tayr Messiah say. So the Alter Rebbe and the Baal Shem Tov, from the greatest tzaddikim that ever lived, they reveal to us the secrets of Pnimiyus HaTorah and Chassidus that inspire us to no end and help us be as Ponecha Avakesh, properly, Begula Mitzvah Shlema, take it from Yad Mamish. Posting, Be'ez Hashem Yisborech, from my home, your man in Melbourne.